What if I told you that before Eve, there was another woman? A woman who didn't bow down, didn't accept being dominated, and decided to leave Eden of her own free will. A figure so powerful that she was ripped from the scriptures, erased from history, and transformed into a demon simply because she dared to be free. Today, you will discover what really happened to Lilith, Adam's first wife, and why her name still frightens those who fear the truth. Prepare yourself. What you are about to hear may forever change how you see Eden and yourself. Have you ever wondered how many stories were ripped from sacred texts before they reached us? How many powerful figures were silenced simply because their truth didn't fit within the official versions of spirituality? Among all these lost stories, one continues to echo silently through the centuries. The story of Lilith, Adam's first wife, the woman who preceded Eve and whose existence most of humanity never knew. And what you are about to discover may deeply surprise you. Perhaps even change the way you understand Eden and the very nature of consciousness. Lilith was erased, distorted, and transformed into a shadow not because she was an evil being, as so many repeat without questioning, but because she represented something many feared to acknowledge: spiritual freedom, equality, autonomy, divine feminine strength in its purest form. Before Eve was molded from Adam's rib, Lilith already walked through the Garden of Eden as her equal, created from the same earth, the same breath, the same primordial spark. But this detail, so essential and so revealing, disappeared from traditional accounts, replaced by controlled and comfortable versions for those who wanted to mold spirituality according to human interests. And this is where things start to get even more intriguing. Why would such an important figure have been removed from so many scriptures? Why does the official story present her only as a demon, a threat, a mistake? If you've ever felt that there's more behind the Genesis accounts than what we've been taught, stay with me until the end, because the narrative of Lilith is precisely the point where hidden spirituality and Gnosticism reveal what many people have preferred to hide. As we explore this forgotten history, it's important to realize that Lilith is not just a mythological character. She is a symbol, an archetype of awakening consciousness, of refusing to submit to control, of the search for truth above conventions. Many apocryphal texts, ancient traditions, and Gnostic teachings point to Lilith as the woman who dared to question the imposed order. And this audacity came at a price. She defies Adam, defies the system, defies even the literal interpretation of divine accounts. And for that reason, she was branded as dangerous. But dangerous for whom? For evil? Or for those who never wanted humanity to awaken to its inner power? In some traditions, Lilith represents exactly that: the repressed side of the human soul, that which seeks autonomy and truth, even if it costs the apparent perfection of Eden. Perhaps you have already felt this calling within yourself, that voice that says there is something beyond the walls of what we have been told, something that doesn't fit within the pages that have survived the hands of history's editors. Comment below if this has ever happened to you, because many people feel this intuition and don't know where it comes from. And when we understand Lilith as a symbol of spiritual freedom, the question changes completely. It's no longer about why she fled Eden, but about what that escape truly means. What leads a being created alongside Adam to choose to break with everything that was imposed upon her? What did she see? What did she feel? What did she understand about the divine nature that so many tried to hide? And why does her name continue to evoke fear, fascination, and discomfort to this day? These answers reveal much more than the trajectory of a forgotten figure. They also reveal what we have been taught not to see about ourselves. And that is precisely why, from this point on, we need to look at Lilith with new eyes, because when we revisit her story without filters, something profound begins to emerge. Something that points to the true meaning of Eden, of freedom, and of the awakening of consciousness. And this is where it all really begins. Let's continue. And when Lilith's story begins to unfold in this way, so different from what we've always heard, something within us also stirs. It's almost as if an ancient memory awakens, as if a forgotten part of the soul finally finds a mirror. And perhaps this has happened to you at some point, that feeling that there is something beyond the official narrative, something subtle, profound, that insists on calling its name. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you most so far. because sharing your perception helps create a space where others can also reflect and recognize themselves. And truly, your participation makes all the difference. Every like, every comment, and every new subscription shows YouTube that this type of content, spiritual, occult, symbolic, often ignored, deserves to reach more people. Sometimes, all someone needs to awaken is exactly a story like this. And when you interact, you help this message travel much further than you imagine. So, if you're feeling this connection to Lilith's story, if this dive into occult spirituality inspires or provokes you, go ahead and leave your like now. This strengthens our community and keeps this channel alive, strong, and growing. And if you haven't signed up yet, consider doing so right now. Not out of obligation, but because if you've made it this far, it means this kind of content resonates with something within you. And I want to continue this journey with you, exploring together the hidden secrets, the erased narratives, the stories that echo beyond what is written. Signing up is the simplest way to ensure you don't miss what's coming. And at the same time, it greatly helps keep this spiritual investigation active for everyone. But that's just the beginning. Because when we turn our gaze to Lilith without the veil of distortions, we realize that her journey goes far beyond a simple act of rebellion. She reveals deep layers of the human soul, forgotten symbols, and mysteries that we still need to decipher. And it is precisely there, at the point where light meets shadow, that the story begins to expand. And it is precisely when the story begins to expand that we need to return to the beginning. Not the beginning you saw in children's illustrations, but the forgotten beginning, the one that remained in the background of spiritual tradition. When we speak of the creation of Lilith, we are not talking about a side detail, but about a hidden truth that changes the way we see Eden and the very mentality with which humanity has been educated. Most people grew up hearing that Eve was the first woman, created from Adam's rib, almost as an extension of him. But in some ancient traditions, this is not the first version of the story. Before Eve, there was Lilith, created from the same substance, the same clay, the same living earth that gave form to Adam himself. This changes everything, because when two beings are made of the same matter, with the same breath and the same divine purpose, there is no natural hierarchy, there is equality. Lilith was not born below, nor behind, nor as a passive complement. She was conceived as full consciousness, a direct reflection of the divine, as legitimate as Adam before creation. Imagine the impact of this on our spiritual journey. From the beginning, the project was not one of domination, but of balance. It was not one person commanding and another obeying, but two forces walking side by side, in partnership with the sacred. Many people have never heard this version. Perhaps you yourself are hearing it for the first time now. And it is here that we begin to realize how certain decisions, made long ago by religious authorities, shaped our worldview. By removing Lilith from the narrative, what is also removed is the idea of a femininity on equal footing with the masculine, a spiritual presence that does not accept being reduced. It's as if an entire piece of the puzzle has been hidden, and without it, all we see is an incomplete image. When we recover this piece, we begin to realize how much our notion of relationship, power, submission, and freedom has been built on a partial foundation. Lilith, created from the same earth, did not accept the idea of being treated as inferior because in her essence she knew, I too came from living dust, I too carry the divine spark. This awareness is not arrogance, it is awakening. There is a huge difference between empty rebellion and refusing to accept a lie. And in many deeper readings, Lilith represents exactly this type of inner transformation. The moment when a soul realizes that it was not created to live bent, diminished, silenced. How many times in your own life have you felt that you were trying to fit into a role smaller than what you truly are? When we look at this story from a symbolic perspective, we begin to understand that Lilith speaks not only of gender, but also of energy, of balance between forces, of integration between light and shadow. Adam and Lilith represent two consciousnesses created in equilibrium, two presences called to fully share the experience of Eden. It is not a matter of a ruler and a subordinate, but of two beings capable of deciding, choosing, learning, and building a direct relationship with the divine. This vision completely changes how we see spirituality, not as something where a few command and many obey, but as a path where each individual is called to awaken. I want to take you a little deeper now, because there's an essential detail that goes unnoticed by many people. If this version of creation has always existed in lesser-known texts, why has it never reached most people? What happens to a narrative when it threatens power structures, established beliefs, traditions based on the idea that one commands and the other follows? In many contexts, it's more convenient to tell the story of a woman born from a rib, from the side, as something dependent on man for her existence. But the image of a woman made from the same earth, with the same level of spiritual authority, changes the game completely. When you realize this, you're not just hearing a different myth. You're confronting the impact of these choices on the collective mindset. It creates discomfort because it forces us to ask, if this was hidden, what else was? How many hidden truths about the soul, about the feminine, about freedom were placed in the shadows so that a certain world model could remain untouched? Lilith's story, in this sense, is a key. It opens a door for us to question not only the past, but also the relationships we accept today, the silent agreements we make, the ways in which we diminish ourselves to be accepted. Notice how this directly impacts everyday decisions. How many times does someone feel the need to be silent to keep the peace, mold themselves to avoid bothering others, or erase themselves to be tolerated? When we reclaim the image of Lilith created in equality, we are also reclaiming an invitation to authenticity. It's not about war between masculine and feminine, but about balance. About recognizing that neither side was made to be crushed. In spiritual terms, this is profoundly healing because it reminds us that true harmony is not born from submission, but from mutual respect. This understanding isn't just theoretical. It affects how you see yourself, your journey of self-discovery, how you deal with relationships, boundaries, courage, and truth. When you recognize that, in essence, you were created with the same spiritual dignity as any other being, something within you realigns. Shame begins to lose its power. The blind fear of displeasing others begins to be questioned, and a feeling of inner worth begins to emerge. It's as if Lilith's story from long ago lights a light within your own story here and now. And if, upon hearing all this, you feel something resonate within you, comment below. I also come from the same land. This simple phrase keeps the conversation alive and paves the way for the next step in this journey, where something even greater begins to emerge. When we understand that Lilith was created from the same earth as Adam, on equal footing, the question that naturally arises is, so where did everything begin to break down? At what point did this initial harmony transform into conflict? This is where the story enters a tense, almost uncomfortable zone, because it directly touches on our mentality regarding power, control, obedience, and freedom. The truth is that the conflict between Lilith and Adam did not arise from chaos, but from a profound difference in vision. He expected a companion who would follow his leadership. She saw herself as someone walking alongside him, not behind him. In many symbolic narratives, the point of conflict arises when Adam attempts to assume a dominant position in the relationship. For him, it made sense to occupy the place of the one who decides, who leads, who has the last word. For Lilith, this was a spiritual error. She knew that no being created from the same divine breath should bow to another as if they were less. This was not a simple marital argument. It was a clash of principles, values, and inner truths. On one side, the idea of hierarchy. On the other, the call for balance. Have you ever experienced something like this, where you realized that the problem wasn't a specific situation, but the entire structure of the relationship? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this conflict isn't just between two figures from an ancient sacred text. It speaks to our own journey. Lilith represents that part of the soul that refuses to live subdued, that cannot bear to betray itself just to fit into others' expectations. Adam, at this point in the narrative, represents the mentality that has been taught for centuries, that someone needs to be in charge and the other needs to adapt. When the two clash, what's at stake isn't just who is right, but what kind of world will be created from that decision. In some versions of the story, Lilith explicitly rejects certain positions of submission. She states something like, "I will not lie beneath you, because we were created equal." This phrase, when viewed from the outside, may seem like just a metaphor about intimacy, but on a symbolic level it is much more than that. She is saying, "I will not occupy an inferior place in any sphere." It is a spiritual cry. It is the moment when consciousness decides not to accept a distorted truth about itself. How many times, silently, have you also felt the urge to say enough to an unjust dynamic? What's most interesting is that, even within a seemingly perfect setting like Eden, this conflict arises. This shows something very important. Just because an environment appears harmonious on the outside doesn't mean it's truly just on the inside. The tension between Lilith and Adam exposes the inner workings of many relationships that, on the surface, seem peaceful, but which conceal control, fear, and imposition. It is at this point that the story ceases to be mere mythology and begins to become a mirror. The way Adam tries to assert authority and how Lilith refuses to accept it reveals two paths: that of silent submission and that of transformation, even if it brings consequences. As the conflict intensifies, the atmosphere changes. We are no longer talking about mere minor disagreements, but about an energetic rupture. Adam insists on a structure in which he occupies the top. Lilith, on the other hand, insists on reminding him that they both drink from the same divine source. She is not trying to dominate him. She is merely defending her right to exist standing tall, whole, without shrinking. This detail is fundamental to understanding the hidden truth behind her supposed rebellion. She doesn't want anyone's throne. She simply doesn't want to be uprooted from her own place. If we look at this narrative as an internal map, Adam and Lilith can be seen as two forces within us. One part repeats patterns, accustomed to accepting ready-made structures, and another questions, seeks authenticity, feels that something doesn't fit. This clash is painful because it pushes us to make difficult decisions, maintain the appearance of peace or face the truth. And the truth often is uncomfortable. It asks, how long will you deny who you really are to preserve an illusion of balance? The impact of this is not small. It permeates relationships, career choices, spirituality, self-esteem. In some Gnostic and esoteric readings, Lilith's no resonates as a turning point in the history of consciousness. While many interpret her as a rebellious and dangerous figure, other traditions see her as the first to say that spiritual freedom is worth more than emotional comfort. She prefers the risk of solitude to the security of a beautiful prison. And this changes everything, because it forces us to rethink what we call obedience. Is obedience always a sign of virtue? Or can it be, in many cases, a way to escape the responsibility of living one's own truth? Notice how this story also speaks about mindset. Adam represents the vision shaped by external rules, by a ready-made model of how things should be. Lilith represents the inner intuition that doesn't fit into this mold. When these two worlds collide, there is no easy reconciliation. Instead of dialogue, tension grows. Instead of openness, there is an attempt to conform. This type of clash is not strange in our time. How many people today feel they are wrong simply because they don't think, don't love, or don't live as most people expect? This conflict is not a simple ego battle. It's a breaking point between a system of control and a call for authenticity. Lilith refuses to be reduced to a functional role within another person's story. She understands that her existence has value in itself, and it is precisely this awareness that makes her so threatening to power structures. Because a human being who knows who they are, who recognizes their inner dignity, is much harder to manipulate. And this applies to the spiritual, emotional, familial, and social realms. When a relationship reaches this level of strain, one thing becomes clear. Either one of the two gives up, or the story goes in a different direction. Lilith chooses not to give up. And this decision, seen from the outside, might be judged as rebellion. But internally, it's a choice of integrity. She prefers to face the consequences of her no, rather than live in disagreement with what she knows to be true. This is one of the greatest lessons hidden in this myth. That sometimes keeping the soul alive requires the courage to break with what seems safe. This is the point where the narrative begins to lean towards something even deeper, almost as if Eden itself could no longer sustain that tension. The seeds of separation have been sown, and what was meant to be a garden of balance becomes the stage for an irreconcilable clash between control and freedom. If this story resonates with you, comment below. I wasn't created to bow down. And leave this phrase as a reminder of the value of your own truth. When this inner decision matures within Lilith, something changes in the very air of Eden. That garden, which once seemed perfect, begins to feel too small for the awakening consciousness within her. It's not that the trees cease to be beautiful, nor that the river ceases to be pure. What no longer fits there is the lie. And this is perhaps the most unsettling part of this story. Eden remains visually intact, but for Lilith it is no longer a paradise. It is a stage for control disguised as harmony. When the soul sees this, there is no way to unsee it. Many people imagine that she was expelled, thrown out as a punishment. But in several more occult traditions, the opposite is true. Lilith chooses to leave. This decision changes everything, because it transforms exile into an act of freedom. It is not the hand of God that throws her out. It is her own spirit that refuses to remain in a place where she needs to deny herself in order to be accepted. This is incredibly powerful, and at the same time, incredibly human. Who has never felt silently that a seemingly perfect environment no longer made sense from within? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Lilith's choice isn't just a physical movement of leaving one place and going to another. It's a shift in mindset, a transformation in how she relates to the divine, to her own worth, to the hidden truth about herself. By getting up and deciding to leave Eden, she is, in practice, saying, I prefer the true unknown to the safety of an illusion. This is one of the most difficult decisions any being can make on their spiritual and emotional journey. And that's why this scene carries such a powerful impact. Imagine the moment when she looks around and understands that the garden, which should be an expression of love and freedom, has become a kind of gilded cage. Everything is beautiful. Everything is seemingly calm. But behind the beauty, there is a pre-written script. She must behave in a certain way, remain silent at certain points, accept certain orders, pretend to disagree less than she actually does. It's like living backstage in a play where her role has already been written by other hands. For someone like Lilith, this is the death of the soul. When she decides to leave, she doesn't do so in blind fury. What moves Lilith is not hatred, but lucidity. She realizes that remaining there would mean betraying her own essence. And for a consciousness that has already awakened, the greatest punishment is not external exile, but internal self-abandonment. So she chooses. And this choice is silent, firm, mature. Instead of shouting to be heard, she withdraws. Instead of begging for a place, she creates for herself an outside that does not yet exist. This is courage on a profound level, because it means walking without guarantees, without applause, without an audience. In the symbolic narrative, the moment when Lilith crosses the boundaries of Eden marks what many would call the first great rupture of human consciousness with illusion. She breaks with the idea that paradise is necessarily a place where everyone obeys a single structure. For her, true paradise can only exist where there is respect for the truth of each being. If this respect is denied, it doesn't matter how many perfect fruits grow on the trees or how many birds sing at dawn. It ceases to be home. And that is what makes her escape so powerful. Do you see how this relates to real-world situations? How many people live in relationships, jobs, religious or social environments that, on the outside, seem impeccable, but on the inside are suffocating? They even hear, "You have everything, what are you complaining about?" But deep down they know they've lost space to be who they really are. Lilith's story of leaving Eden by her own choice is like a mirror of these experiences. It's not about encouraging irresponsible escape, but about recognizing that there is a limit, the point at which remaining in a place means abandoning oneself completely. In many esoteric readings, this departure is interpreted as humanity's first great step towards consciousness. While Adam remains, trying to maintain the structure as it is, Lilith becomes the figure of rupture, the one who accepts the cost of leaving behind what is not true. She walks towards a symbolic desert, an unknown space where there are no set rules, but there is room to build a more authentic relationship with the sacred. This desert is not punishment, it is a laboratory. It is the place where the soul finds itself, without filters. This movement of leaving an illusory Eden for a true desert also speaks of decisions that change destinies. These are the moments when you know that if you stay where you are, you will wither inside, but if you leave, you will face uncertainties. It's a difficult choice. Most prefer to stay and adapt. Lilith does not. She accepts the cold of the night, the feeling of no longer having the garden beneath her feet, because she trusts that there is something more real than what they tried to impose as the only path. It's a journey of revelations that begins with a simple decision. I will no longer live a life that is not mine. As this image deepens, it becomes clear that Lilith's exile is, in fact, a rebirth. She ceases to be merely Adam's first wife and becomes a being in herself, a consciousness that walks without a label. This completely deconstructs the traditional narrative, which usually presents female figures always associated with someone. Wife of, mother of, daughter of. Lilith breaks with this logic. She becomes simply Lilith. And this is a revolutionary gesture, both in myth and in the symbolization of our own search for identity. From the moment she leaves Eden, we begin to see the unfolding of this choice in layers: spiritual, emotional, energetic. The energy of obedience gives way to the energy of authenticity. The person who accepts in order not to lose transforms into the person who takes risks in order not to lose themselves. This shakes the entire internal structure. It's as if the story is inviting us to look at our own escapes and ask, which false paradises have I already needed to leave in order to breathe? And which ones do I still need to leave? This part of the myth is uncomfortable because it takes us out of the position of passive spectators. We can't view Lilith's escape merely as a distant event. It invites us to revisit our own decisions, our limits, our compromises. And without realizing it, we begin to understand that often what we call exile in life was, in fact, the gateway to a phase of awakening. The loss of a place, a relationship, a structure, is sometimes precisely what pushes us out of a scenario that was never truly home. When you listen to this story with an open heart, you realize that Lilith's departure from Eden is not the end. It's the beginning of something else. Something more raw, more truthful, less controlled. It's not comfortable, but it's real. And it's on this path, outside the garden walls, that a new understanding of freedom, truth, and purpose begins to emerge. If this resonates with any phase of your life, write in the comments, "My exile was also an awakening," and leave this phrase as a milestone in your own journey. As the image of Lilith walking out of Eden begins to fade from our field of vision, it's as if the story takes an even more unsettling turn. Because from the point of view of consciousness, she becomes a symbol of awakening. But from the point of view of control systems, she becomes a problem. A woman who chose, who decided to leave, who did not accept the role of submissive, represents a direct threat to any structure built on blind obedience. It is precisely from there that another silent chapter begins: the process of demonization. What was once a figure of spiritual courage is gradually redesigned as a monster, a dark presence that needs to be feared. And this change doesn't happen overnight. It is the result of a sequence of decisions, of a mentality that prefers to erase what it doesn't know how to deal with. If we carefully observe the behind-the-scenes aspects of religious traditions throughout the centuries, one thing becomes clear. Anything that empowers the individual too much is usually seen as dangerous. And Lilith, in this sense, is one of the strongest archetypes. She is not just a character who left Eden. She is a living message about autonomy, transformation, and the ability to choose one's own path, even if it costs comfort. In many later texts, she ceases to be seen as a free figure and comes to be described as a seductive evil, a child killer, queen of demons. The symbolic punishment for a woman who refused to submit becomes a warning of terror for all others. Think about it. If you wanted to prevent future Liliths from emerging, what would be the most effective strategy? Instead of discussing the message she carries, instead of facing the impact of your decision, it's easier to rewrite history. You take the same figure and dress her up with a different narrative. Where there was courage, you put perversion. Where there was freedom, you put danger. Where there was a cry from the soul, you put a curse. All of this is not just religious symbolism, it's mental engineering. It's a way of using fear as a tool of control. And fear, when repeated generation after generation, ends up shaping decisions without people realizing it. This dynamic doesn't only occur with Lilith. Throughout humanity's spiritual history, many figures and ideas linked to the awakening of consciousness have been labeled as heresy, witchcraft, or madness. The pattern is the same. Anything that brings human beings closer to a direct relationship with the divine is treated as a threat. With Lilith, this takes on a special focus because the target is the power of the sacred feminine. that energy that questions, feels, decides, and refuses to accept a lesser role. And this is where a delicate point comes in. This rewritten history doesn't just stay in old books. It seeps into culture, into stories, into images, into the way the feminine is perceived. The woman who talks too much, who decides too much, who doesn't bow her head, is often labeled as a problem, as a threat to peace. And isn't that exactly what they did to Lilith? They transformed her refusal to submit into a synonym for evil. Her desire for truth became an accusation of rebellion against God. Her no to oppression was reinterpreted as a yes to chaos. When we look at this with a little more honesty, we realize that Lilith's story was used as an inverted mirror. Where there was light, they projected shadow. By studying these layers, it becomes evident that there is a game of narratives at play. On one hand, texts and traditions preserve the image of Lilith as a figure of power, consciousness, and freedom. On the other, versions that place her in the role of enemy, seductress, nocturnal creature. This division is not accidental. It reveals a conflict between two ways of understanding spirituality, one based on fear, the other based on awakening. When a symbol is dangerous to the system, it is distorted. And when this distortion is repeated for centuries, many people come to believe that the caricature is the truth. But deep down, something still bothers them. There is an internal noise, an intuition that whispers, something is wrong with this story. This feeling arises from the contrast between the official narrative and the intimate experience of those who begin to question. When you look at Lilith through this lens, you realize that the attempt to transform her into a witch, demon, or threat has more to do with control than with authentic spirituality. It's not about protecting the divine, but about protecting structures. And structures, by definition, resist change. They fear transformation, they fear revelations, they fear anything that might shake the hierarchy. That's why the sacred feminine, when it manifests in its full strength, is so often attacked, because it does not submit. Even more interesting is realizing how, in current times, the figure of Lilith is beginning to be reclaimed in a different way. Instead of merely fearing her, more and more people see her as a symbol of an inner journey of reclaiming their own voice, the right to feel, to choose, to exist without masking their essence. It's almost as if, after so many centuries of imposed silence, her archetype is returning to the surface, bringing with it an uncomfortable question. How many times have you erased who you are to fit into what others expected of you? Reflecting on this, the story ceases to be just an ancient tale and begins to directly touch our daily lives. This reclaiming of her story doesn't mean idolizing Lilith or transforming her into a new perfection. Rather, it means recognizing what has been done with her history and how this has shaped the perception of femininity and spiritual freedom. It's about looking at the hidden truth behind layers of fear and understanding that, while her image was painted with horns and shadows, the central message was stifled. The idea that no being born from the same divine breath was created to live on their knees. When this message resurfaces, it no longer belongs solely to a mythical character. It becomes an invitation to all who feel broken inside for having rejected their own calling. As this understanding deepens, the figure of Lilith ceases to be a warning of terror and becomes a mirror of courage. And this mirror is unsettling because it shows not only what was done to her, but also what we often do to our own truth. We demonize legitimate desires, we call wrong what no longer fits, we punish ourselves for wanting something different from what was planned. Her story exposes this internal mechanism and invites us to choose again. Perhaps, on some level, this is why Lilith's energy resonates so strongly. Because we are in a time when many people no longer accept living in narratives that make no sense. And if, upon hearing all this, you feel that some piece falls into place within you, if this behind-the-scenes look at spiritual narratives brings new questions to your mind, write in the comments, "I no longer believe in the distorted version," and leave this phrase as a marker of your own change of perspective. When we begin to understand how Lilith's image has been strategically distorted over the centuries, something very significant happens. The historical figure dissolves and gives way to something much greater, something that doesn't fit solely within ancient texts. Lilith ceases to be just a specific character and begins to function as a powerful mirror, an archetype that directly touches profound aspects of our consciousness. It is here that myth meets humanity. It is here that history transforms into a map. Because from a Gnostic point of view, Lilith represents an internal movement that we are all called to make at some point in our lives. The movement of the soul that refuses to bow before a lie. The hidden truth behind this myth is that Lilith is not just a woman who rebelled. She is the symbol of spiritual awakening. That moment when you realize that living your truth costs less than remaining within a narrative that suffocates you. When she leaves Eden, when she challenges Adam, when she rejects impositions, she is, in practice, saying something that still resonates today. I will not reduce myself to fit into someone's limited vision. And this phrase, even when unspoken, silently accompanies people who begin to question their own lives. How many of us have felt this inner restlessness, this desire to break free from roles that no longer make sense? Now I want to bring this perspective closer, because Lilith as an archetype doesn't only speak of strength. She also speaks of the pain of awakening. It's not easy to abandon structures, face judgment, or confront the impact of one's own decisions. The inner strength she represents is not aggression, it's authenticity. She doesn't fight to dominate, she fights to exist. This is the point that many ancient traditions have tried to erase. Lilith is not the rebellious woman. Lilith is the consciousness that says no to self-abandonment. And this no is often silent, solitary, but profoundly transformative. When we look at her story through this lens, we begin to see parallels with so many moments in life where we have to choose between maintaining a comfortable role or embracing who we truly are. Sometimes this manifests as emotional decisions, when someone realizes they are in a relationship that requires them to suppress their own essence. Other times, it's a spiritual rupture, when a person realizes their true faith no longer fits within the religion or doctrine they inherited. And still other times, it's a change in mindset, when everything that once seemed normal begins to cause discomfort because the soul starts to demand more. Lilith represents that invisible point in the human journey. The moment when something within you awakens and says that you can no longer continue in the old way. And what is most fascinating is that this archetype appears in different cultures with different names, but always carrying the same essence. The force that questions, the intuition that senses, the consciousness that perceives that submission is not synonymous with peace. Therefore, within the Gnostic vision, she is not seen as a threat, but as a guardian of awakening. A symbol of what exists within each person when they connect with their innermost truth. It's interesting to note that this archetype is unsettling precisely because it confronts structures. When you incorporate Lilith's energy within yourself, even unconsciously, you begin to ask unsettling questions. Why does it have to be this way? Why do I have to follow this rule? Why can't I choose my own path? These questions are seeds of transformation. They are invitations to a more honest inner journey. And as with all change, they also bring fear. Lilith herself felt this. Freedom is frightening because it offers no guarantees. But it is still worth more than living imprisoned in a narrative that doesn't belong to you. Her archetype also reminds us that freedom is not synonymous with chaos. Many people confuse authenticity with blind rebellion, but they are two very different things. Rebellion destroys impulsively. Authenticity dismantles what is false to build something true. And that's what Lilith does. She doesn't leave Eden to watch the world burn. She leaves because she realizes that Eden, as it was already dead inside. That's the difference between fleeing and liberating oneself. Fleeing is escaping discomfort. Liberating oneself is honoring what you feel, even if it takes you outside your comfort zone. If we look at these patterns today, we realize that we live in a world where many people are trying to rediscover that inner voice, the voice that no longer accepts living under imposed labels. That's why the figure of Lilith has regained strength, because she represents a truth that cannot be silenced, even when attempts are made to erase it. She is a living image of inner power, the kind of strength that is not measured by appearance, but by the courage to uphold one's own essence in environments that try to mold you. And there's another essential point. Lilith, as an archetype, is the bridge between shadow and light. She shows us that awakening doesn't mean becoming a perfect being, but accepting the parts we were taught to hide. Accepting desires, emotions, limits, dreams that have been kept hidden, the intuition that has always been stifled. Integrating all of this is not a simple process, but it is a necessary step towards real transformation. Within each person there is a sleeping Lilith, a force that senses when they are living a lie, a force that whispers that there is still something greater waiting to be discovered. That's the beauty of this archetype. It returns power to those who listen to their own truth. And it doesn't matter if the transformation begins small, with a timid question or a slight discomfort. Awakening always begins like this: silent, almost invisible, but capable of changing everything over time. Lilith represents that initial spark, that gentle courage that grows as you begin to reconnect with your essence. And if this reflection ignited something within you, if in some way you felt that this symbolic force speaks to parts of yourself that were forgotten, write in the comments, "I recognize my own voice." This phrase marks the natural continuation of the journey that we will still explore from here on out. When we observe everything that has happened to Lilith throughout the centuries, her departure from Eden, her demonization, her transformation into an archetype, we realize that there is something curious, almost mysterious, about the time in which we live. It's as if her story has lain dormant for generations, hidden in the background of scriptures, guarded in the cracks of occult traditions, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And isn't it strange that this resurgence is happening now, precisely at a time when so many people are questioning their beliefs, revisiting their decisions, realizing that the hidden truth is often behind what seems obvious? Perhaps none of this is a coincidence. Perhaps the return of the Lilith myth to the collective imagination is directly linked to our own awakening process. No matter where we look today, spirituality, relationships, mindset, personal journey, there's a collective feeling that something is changing. The old structures no longer hold up as they once did. People who spent their entire lives obeying without questioning are now beginning to ask why. People who were afraid to be authentic are now beginning to feel an almost inevitable urge to live as they truly are. And, in a way, this is the return of Lilith happening within each of us. Because when we talk about this archetype, we're not talking about an external figure. We're talking about an internal force, a kind of wild and sacred consciousness that awakens precisely when you can no longer live within a reduced version of yourself. Now I want to take you a little deeper into this reflection, because Lilith's return is not a spiritual fad. It represents a change of era, a shift in mentality. For a long time, humanity has lived in a relationship with the sacred based on fear, obedience, and hierarchy. And this has shaped generations. It has shaped families, religions, decisions, behaviors. It has even shaped how people deal with their own emotions. The archetype of Lilith returns now as an antidote to this type of structure, not to destroy it, but to reveal its cracks. She returns to show that the sacred also lives in freedom, that true spirituality is not born from submission, but from inner connection. That spiritual awakening is not about following a path written by others, but about creating your own. And when you realize this, her story ceases to be a distant tale and becomes an extremely relevant mirror. How many times have you felt you were repeating a life that wasn't yours? How many times have you realized you were living inside an Eden that seemed perfect, but that internally suffocated you? How many times have you had to abandon a place, a belief, or even an identity in order not to lose yourself? These are the moments in life when Lilith's energy returns, not as a mystical figure, but as an impulse for authenticity. As a reminder that, when the soul awakens, it no longer fits into the old molds. The most interesting thing is that, in the Gnostic tradition, awakening is not an explosive event. It happens gradually, like a veil slowly moving, revealing invisible layers. This movement takes place within the mind, but also spreads throughout life. And Lilith symbolizes exactly this transition. The moment when you feel you need to follow a calling, even without knowing exactly where it will lead you. She represents the courage to take a step towards uncertainty, trusting that the truth found outside the comfort zone is more valuable than any security that requires inner renunciation. When we consider her return, we also need to remember that society is currently rediscovering the sacred feminine, not in opposition to the masculine, but as a necessary complement to restore balance. For a long time, the feminine was associated with weakness, chaos, and dangerous mystery. But now more and more people realize that this feminine is not a threat, it is power. It is sensitivity, intuition, emotional depth, the ability to transform. It is what makes the soul move when reason no longer knows what to do. And Lilith returns to remind us that this energy has always existed, even when they tried to extinguish it. It's as if she were saying, you no longer need to live divided between who you are and who the world expects you to be. Her return is, in fact, an invitation to reintegration, to look at your own shadow honestly, to accept parts of yourself that have been repressed, old angers, legitimate desires, deep truths you could never express. And in doing so, something realigns inside. Because awakening is not just about gaining light, it's also about embracing what was hidden. It's about gathering all that you are, and not just the part that has been socially approved. Perhaps that's why so many people feel an unexpected connection when they hear Lilith's story. Even without fully understanding, there's something in her presence that activates an ancient memory, a feeling that we already know this inner movement, that we've already felt this force, that we've already experienced some form of inner exodus to avoid betraying our own essence. Lilith, as an archetype of return, symbolizes that moment when you look inward and realize that the path to the ascension of consciousness is not linear, it's spiral. Each turn deepens a little more. Each revelation pulls another. Each pain reveals a door. And the most beautiful thing is that, from this perspective, she ceases to be just a mythical character and becomes part of our own collective journey. A journey that involves healing, revising beliefs, transforming mindsets, and reconnecting with what is genuine. Lilith returns now because we are in a time when the human soul no longer accepts living halfway. We are in a period of massive awakening, in which many people feel they need to seek the hidden truth behind official versions. And this search is no longer individual, it is generational. It's as if humanity is going through a process of returning to its own consciousness. And if, while you were listening to all this, some part of you felt that this story resonated with your own, leave a symbolic phrase in the comments. I am returning to myself. This is a simple way to honor the journey that continues from here on out. And if you've made it this far, to the very last moment of this journey, that already says a lot about you. It means that some part of this story called to you, touched you, perhaps even awakened something that was dormant inside. And if this type of content resonates with you, if these dives into the soul, into symbolism, and into hidden truth help you see life more deeply, then I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Not only to receive future videos, but because it keeps this space alive, a space where we can continue exploring these layers that most have never dared to look at. Before you go, leave a comment below with a phrase that marks your presence until the end. I walked until the very last step. That way I know you came with me this far, and it creates a real connection between us. And of course, if you felt that connection, if something in this video enlightened you in some way, leave a like. It helps the video reach more people who may also be looking for answers, even if they don't know where to start. Now, if you want to continue this journey with me, there's a video over here that perfectly complements what we discussed today. Click on it and follow along, because the story doesn't end here.